Layoffs at Bombardier, a for sale sign on Essar Steel Algoma. What's going on with these former giants of Canadian innovation? And is it time for the government to step in or not? To consider that, on the line from London, Ontario, there's Mike Moffat. He's professor of economics at the Ivey School of Business at Western University. And here in studio, Christine Oram, transportation reporter at the Financial Post. And it's good to see you two both back on our program again. Let's just share some of the bad news here with our viewers who may not have heard it so far. The job cuts at Bombardier are really quite profound. By 2017, they will be cutting 3,200 jobs from their transportation division, 2,500 from Aerostructures and Engineering Services division, 800 more from the Aerospace Product Development Engineering Group, and 500 from the Business Aircraft Unit. Mike, to you first, did you think these deep cuts, when you heard about them, were necessary?
Well, Bombardier had, there have been rumors around that the market had felt that Bombardier was overstaffed, that they had too many people doing jobs with no real clear job function. So the market reacted well to this. The stock actually rose and is now worth more than $1, which is good news for Bombardier. Naturally, it's never good news when anybody loses their job, but this seemed unfortunately necessary.
And Christine, I mean, Bombardier put a heck of a lot of money into research and development for this plane that's on the screen behind us over here, and yet they can't seem to sell them. And not only that, it seems to be well behind in development, and it's just been a mess. What went wrong?
Well, it's a huge question. I could probably talk for the full show just about that, but I will resist the urge. I'd say you can kind of narrow it down to three main things that went wrong. First, they sort of underestimated the reaction of their competitors. And I'm talking specifically about Boeing and Airbus, which don't make planes exactly in the same size range as the C-Series. The C-Series is a little bit smaller, but they're close. And so what happened is when Boeing and Airbus heard that this plane was being made, heard that it was coming into the market, they thought, you know what? It isn't worth our time. We want to try to squeeze Bombardier out, make sure they fail here. And so they started offering pretty steep discounts on their own planes to customers who already had a lot of Boeing and Airbus planes in their fleet, which of course was pretty attractive to those customers. That's made it very hard for the C-Series to sell to a lot of big airlines out there. Secondly, Bombardier probably took on too much at once. At the same time that they were building the C-Series, they were developing two separate new business jets, as well as a lot of different work in their train-making division. And I've spoken to executives there, former and current, who said that the capital was just spread out too thin. There was a lot of infighting for the resources that they needed for their different projects, and that hurt all of the different projects at the same time. And finally, there's question whether there's even a market for this size of plane at all, 100 to 150 seats.
What's the problem with that size?
Well, it's been a long time since anyone has made a plane that size, and Bombardier thought, okay, well, that's a great opportunity for us to come in and take advantage of this gap in the market. But other people say, well, maybe there was a reason no one else was making these planes, and there are regional jets that are smaller than that. There are a lot of larger jets made by Boeing and Airbus, and a lot of airlines just don't see the need for that specific size of airplane.
Mike, let me follow up with this. You mentioned that the stock price for Bombardier actually went up a bit, albeit not to stratospheric levels, but it did go up. Air Canada, conversely, announces that they're going to buy up to 75 of these C-Series planes, and their stock goes down. I guess, well, two things. Number one, explain to me why that happened.
Well, I think the concern is that Air Canada was giving a sort of a bit of a cookie to Bombardier, and that this may have been done for political reasons. That said, it looks like Air Canada actually got a pretty good deal here. That this was a jet that was supposed to sell for about $65 million or so, give or take. Air Canada is getting them for 30, so it's getting a 60% discount. So, on paper, it actually looks like a really good deal for Air Canada, but I think the market's a little bit concerned that Air Canada might not be doing this for bottom line reasons.
Okay, Mike, so if that's the case, maybe not so great for Air Canada, the market suggests in the short run, but how about for Bombardier? Is this a big enough shot in the arm to give people the confidence that this company actually has a future?
Well, if they can actually get these planes built in a reasonable amount of time, and their R&D was 2.5 years off of schedule. They had billion-dollar cost overruns. So I think Bombardier is using this as a test to show that they can deliver these planes on budget, on time, and then use that experience to upsell to customers and hopefully sell the planes at a much higher price.
Now, Christine, Air Canada, of course, for decades now, has not been a Crown corporation, which means theoretically, when the Minister of Transportation calls, it's not the same today as it would have been back in the day. So why do you think Air Canada made this deal?
Well, both Air Canada and Bombardier were pretty insistent when this deal was announced that there was no government pressure and that they received no government support to do it. So they said this was 100% a commercial deal. It made sense for us on a commercial level, and that's the only reason why we did it. However, there was more to it than that because Air Canada was in the midst of a lawsuit with the Quebec government, and that was over a decision they had made to move maintenance work from Quebec to the United States, and that had violated an agreement that they had under legislation that governs Air Canada, and so the Quebec government was suing them. Now, that lawsuit has been dropped as part of this agreement because Air Canada's agreed to do all of the maintenance work on the C-Series in Quebec for a minimum of 20 years. On top of that, Transport Minister Marc Garneau said earlier this week that he's reevaluating the legislation that governs Air Canada in order to make it more market-friendly. Perhaps they don't face this kind of lawsuit again in the future. So they did get something out of this, and it may not have been direct support or direct pressure, but it wasn't nothing either.
I'm reading between the lines of what you're saying, and clearly somebody in government put their thumb on the scale here.
It seems like it, and I mean, I think Air Canada and Bombardier would deny that, but it's questionable. You know, it's been 17 months since Bombardier last announced a new order for the C-Series until this Air Canada one, and the first major order they get in North America comes from a Canadian airline located in Montreal, just like Bombardier.
It's a coincidence.
It's just a coincidence. It's not surprising that there was at least a little bit of government, perhaps a little bit of a carrot that the government threw into it to help make it a more appealing decision.
Well, let's get into the big question here, which is, of course, the government of Quebec has stepped up and put $1 billion of provincial taxpayer money into trying to revive this company. And now, of course, the federal government is being asked, Mike, to put $1 billion of money from the citizens of Canada, not just one province, into this venture to keep it going. Should the feds pony up $1 billion here, Mike?
Well, I certainly think it's appropriate that they go to the table and negotiate with Bombardier, but I don't think it makes sense for them to just give $1 billion or $1.3 billion, whatever the number is, with no strings attached whatsoever. That I think the government should be looking for a number of conditions. First of all, they should be getting some equity back, like they did in the auto bailout and like the Quebec government did in the deal they made with the C-Series for Bombardier. And second, I think they really need to do something about this dual share structure, which puts, basically all of the voting power or the bulk of the voting power in the hands of the Bombardier family and relatives. So if they can make a deal work, then I think this is something that the federal government should look at. But at the same time, at least economically, I think the federal government has to be willing to walk away from that table if they can't get an appropriate deal.
Well, Christine, I've been hearing even more than that, which is that one of the conditions ought to be that the Bombardier family, which is essentially, I guess, Executive Chairman Baudouin at this point, has to disassociate himself from the company because he managed it so badly. Is that a condition you're hearing about as well?
Yeah, and I think that ties back to what Mike was saying about the share structure as well, because right now Bombardier has two classes of shares. The family owns the voting controlling shares, which means that they still control the company even though they hold a minority of shares. And it's not just Baudouin himself who is the executive chairman, but his father and many other family members are also still sit on the board as well. And so that has been a real issue of concern for a lot of investors in Bombardier, saying, a lot of the problems here are the family's fault, and until they can remove themselves from the company, it's going to be hard to make real change, and that's been the case for decades. So, I think Mike has a very good point there. That's a legitimate thing that should be brought up. But I also think the broader question is, and this is a huge debate, but should the government be in the business of picking winners and losers and picking what industries should succeed and should not succeed in Canada? And that's a giant philosophical question, but what makes Bombardier more apt for a bailout than any other industry potentially? And the government's been supporting Bombardier for years through various mechanisms, and so it would be hard to stop at this point. But if they can't make a plane that is commercially viable on its own, is it the government's role to step in and make it commercially viable? And I think that's something we should be at least having a conversation about.
I know you work for the Post, but you do read the Globe every now and then, don't you?
I do.
Every now and then.
I do. Yeah.
Here's what your friend Eric Reguly had to say in the Globe and Mail. He said the effort to save Bombardier from its self-inflicted wounds was always going to be a messy and expensive affair, but no one said it had to be obscene too. It's obscene because the investors who will benefit most from the government-sponsored bailout programs, some in place, some to come, are the Bombardier and Baudouin family members who remain in control of the company in spite of their epic management sins. This is called rewarding bad behavior, the equivalent of handing a BMW to your reckless son after he drove the Buick into a wall. Okay, the guy can write, let's face it. All right. Mike, follow up with this, though. We've talked about the need or not to have the Bombardier family disassociated from the company. But in your view, other countries around the world subsidize their aircraft manufacturers in a big way. It happens with Airbus, it happens in Brazil. Does the government kind of does have to take that into account as it makes its decisions on this, doesn't it?
Well, it certainly does. That this is called a pay-to-play industry. I think more the federal government just needs to decide. Is this something that it doesn't make sense for them to pay to play? So there's this ongoing or this existing infrastructure in the aerospace industry in Quebec. It employs 40,000 people. So I don't think it's unrealistic for the federal government to say, well, look, if we don't do this, what happens to the industry in Quebec? How much corporate income tax, personal income tax will we lose out on if this industry shrinks? How much EI do we need to pay? So, I think they basically need to look at this like any other investor and say, okay, if I put $1 billion into this, what am I going to get in return? And since this is taxpayer money, it better be more than that $1 billion.
It's not like any other situation, though, I think, Christine, because there are 40 Liberal seats in the province of Quebec, and Justin Trudeau just won 100 and some odd days ago a majority government. I mean, that political reality is going to be screaming in their ears, is it not?
Well, that's been the case for basically the whole history of Bombardier, right? And I mean, there have been controversies in the past where the government chose Bombardier to service their F-35s over a company in Winnipeg that created a whole national unity crisis where the West felt left out, at the expense of Quebec. And that's often the case when Bombardier gets support from the federal government. Sort of, okay, are we doing this because it is a pay-to-play industry and we want an aerospace industry in Canada, or are we doing that because the aerospace industry is largely based in Quebec? And therefore, there's a lot of political considerations that come into it as well. And so I think, Mike has a very good point. It's virtually impossible to have an aerospace industry without government support, and Boeing and Airbus and Embraer in Brazil all receive a lot of government support. But again, it comes back to why are we doing this? Why do we feel the need to have an aerospace industry at all? And what are the political considerations there, especially because this is largely a Quebec-based industry?
Follow up, if you will, because largely Quebec-based, but of course here in the province of Ontario, I think, in fact, the city of Toronto has been waiting for streetcars from Bombardier for a very long time. What's the status of that order?
Yeah, that's true. And actually, it's important to point out that there are a lot of jobs in Ontario associated with Bombardier as well. Here in Toronto at Downsview, they make business aircraft. They have a plant in Thunder Bay where those streetcars are being built as well. There have been a lot of issues with that streetcar job, which we're pretty familiar with. They're delayed. They've had a lot of quality problems with them. The City of Toronto and the TTC have been very angry about that. And it's actually that Thunder Bay plant where those are being made will suffer from those layoffs that were announced earlier this week. About 430 people will be laid off there, not associated with that streetcar contract, but with an existing subway contract that's winding down. But still, that raises questions about the other side of Bombardier's business, which is that train and subway making business, which has had a lot of quality problems as well, and which does employ people in Canada and especially in Ontario.
That's so strange, Mike, because, I know going back 1, 2, and 3 decades, Bombardier was, they were selling these subway cars all over the world and taking a great deal of pride in doing so. What's happened there?
Well, again, it's hard to tell from an outsider, but just the fact that you have these problems in all of their divisions, so you keep hearing these issues with delays, with quality control, whether it be in this C-Series R&D, the Learjet, their trains and subway. This seems to be a systemic problem in the company, and when you have these kind of systemic problems, I think you need to look at leadership. And again, I think that's why it's going to be so important for the federal government that if there's a deal here, they're going to need to do something with this share structure and get some new blood in place.
Okay, Mike, let's, while you've got the floor, let's follow up with another legacy business here in central Canada that is really facing some very tough roads ahead, and that is Essar Steel Algoma. Algoma Steel, as we used to call it up in Sault Ste. Marie. They have applied for creditor protection once again. They did so last November. They're now looking for a new buyer. I guess there was a lot of optimism there several years ago when an offshore purchaser came in and seemed to breathe new life into the place. What's happened since?
Well, I mean, this is a company that's hemorrhaging money largely because of what's going on in the international steel market. Prices are down about 40%. This year, it's going to be tough for them. I mean, they owe the city government tens of millions in back property taxes. There's issues with their pensions, and now they're trying to sell this company. They're sort of required to as part of their debt financing at a time when steel prices are at a decade low, and companies like ArcelorMittal are hemorrhaging money. So it's kind of the worst timing or worst case scenario where you really have to sell this asset at a time where nobody seems to be buying.
You say nobody seems to be buying. Is there, as far as you can tell, any prospective purchaser out there at all?
Well, I think it can always happen that someone can make a long play and say, okay, well, here's a chance to get an asset at maybe 20 or 30 cents on the dollar. Let's do it and bet that steel prices are going to go up over the next 15 or 20 years. So it's always possible, but this is a distressed asset, no question. And
what are the ramifications for Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario itself if no one comes forward?
Well, I mean, this is a company that I would consider to be too big to fail almost. That this looks, again, a lot like the auto bailout, where you start to look and go, okay, well, what happens, if Chrysler goes down in Windsor? I think this is a similar situation there, where you've got this company of 2,000 to 3,000 people, you've got all the pensioners, and then you have all the spin-off jobs around that. So this would be devastating to that community. So we're all hoping that they can find a buyer, and if they can't, then I think all levels of government have some very difficult decisions to make.
Christine, can you put the Algoma situation into an international context insofar as what's happening all over the world in steel?
Well, I mean, Mike makes a very good point, which is that it's not just one company, especially here in Canada. You have U.S. Steel as well that's been, it's in the middle of trying to find a buyer. Its parent company has basically disowned it and said, we're walking away from this, so good luck, and leaving a lot of pensioners in the lurch as well. And so what's happening in the steel industry is that, of course, it's like so many other commodities, really dependent on demand from China. Chinese economy, growth is slowing there. You also have China doing a lot of its own steel making as well. And some of that steel is being, some steelmakers in Canada are accusing China of dumping steel in the Canadian market at very low prices, which is hurting the competitiveness of steelmakers here at home. And so you're in a situation where it's virtually impossible to compete. And so this goes back to the broader question of, how does the government pick and choose winners, and should they be stepping in here and supporting Canadian steelmakers at a time where they're almost at a loss for ways to support themselves?
Let me ask about the pensioners, though. If you are one of the tens of thousands of people who have worked over the years for U.S. Steel Canada, formerly Stelco, as we used to call it, or Essar Steel Algoma, if you're one of those tens of thousands of people, what is the status of your pension right now if these businesses disappear?
Well, I think that's especially a concern at U.S. Steel, and there's an ongoing court case about exactly what's going to happen here and who gets the money, if this company does go bankrupt, and who gets the first claim on those assets. And right now the parent company is saying it's our money, and the pensioners are saying, well, wait a second, you can't just leave us after decades of service in the lurch with no...
And they paid into it too.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, the Ontario government has guaranteed some support to those pensioners, but if the company were to go bankrupt entirely and not find find new buyers and just disappear, those pensioners are not going to be getting 100% of what they thought they were going to be earning. And that's very difficult when you're already retiring and dependent on a certain kind of income and lifestyle.
Sure. Mike, some of us are old enough to remember 25 years ago or so, the Bob Rae government of Ontario stepped in when Algoma got into some difficulty back then, and essentially, kind of created a new board. They put former Premier Bill Davis on the board, former Saskatchewan Premier Alan Blakeney on the board, some union positions on the board, tried to restructure the company, tried to save it, seemed to work for a little while. Is that an option this time?
Well, they can certainly try. I think the difficulty here, again, is what's happening to world steel prices. That this is a very different case than Bombardier. That Bombardier, you can look at it and go, okay, you've got this management system in place, and these managers made some poor decisions, or at least it looks that way from the outside. So if we get some new management into place, hopefully we can salvage this thing. There's nothing the federal government or Ontario government can do to increase world steel prices. And in my view, the long-term outlook for steel prices is not looking that great. As Christine mentioned, demand in China is slowing. And as well, they're becoming a net exporter. China produces about half of the world's steel. Their exports were up 20% last year, and that looks to continue. Couple that with Russia and India selling low-cost steel into this country, there doesn't seem to be sort of an obvious solution where it's like, okay, we can put in a new board, change some management decisions, and then maybe ride this out for 12 to 18 months when steel prices go back up. That seems to me to be very, very optimistic.
Let's finish off in our last few minutes here, and Christine, you've brought this issue up before already, this notion of whether or not these two companies are too big to fail. Now, I read your paper rather religiously, and I noticed that you have been bombarding us over the last few days with, both on the editorial page and the op-ed page, with let them go. I mean, Terry Corcoran especially, and, it's time to stop putting good money after bad. It's time to let Bombardier sink. They can't make it on their own. What do you think?
Well, I'm not an op-ed columnist, so I will not weigh in on Terry's opinions. Yeah, that's right, exactly. Yes. But I think that's a real question that we need to debate, and that the federal government needs to be considering as it decides whether or not to be investing another $1 billion in Bombardier. Is that clearly the C-Series was probably not a great decision, and that was encouraged in part by the federal government, which gave them $350 million back in 2008 to fund the building of this program. And so now that it's done, it's certified, it's going to be delivered to its first customer in the next quarter, it exists. There's nothing we can do about it. And so are we prepared to walk away from a company that employs tens of thousands of people in Canada and 70,000 people around the world, or not? Right?
That is an issue, but I think, as I think read in your paper, this is, I think, the 51st time Bombardier has gone to the federal government with handouts saying, we need your money or we're not going to be able to survive. I mean, that's not a, well, I should ask, is that a reasonable business proposition to have happen over and over and over?
Well, from a market perspective, absolutely not. But I think, in a way, the culpability is more with the government than with Bombardier. And to be fair to Bombardier, they have had this support all along. And so to keep asking for it isn't really unreasonable in a way. They've been reliant on it basically from the very beginning and continue to be. And so that is part of their business model, and it always has been and continues to be.
They haven't paid back the last tranche yet.
That's true. That's true. That is up to the federal government to maybe put more strict conditions in place on these loans. But I mean, if the business model has always been based on federal support, to suddenly just say, too bad you don't get any anymore, is that a reasonable thing to do? Especially when this is a very diversified business, to be fair. Bombardier is more than just the C-Series. They have business aircraft, which generally sell quite well. There's a slowdown in that market right now. They have this massive train-making division in Europe that they're restructuring. And so C-Series aside, the company is not in terrible shape. And so if this is just the albatross around their necks, should they be getting the support from the government to keep it going? I think at this stage, it's probably too late to walk away.
Mike, in our last minute here, we're talking about two significant legacy businesses in Canada. What does their predicament say about the status of the entire Canadian economy today, in your view?
Well, certainly there's been a lot of changes to the Canadian economy with fluctuating dollar, changes in manufacturing and that sort of thing. This should actually be a time where you would think that Bombardier would be doing quite well with the low Canadian dollar. That's really sort of boosted manufacturing. So Bombardier is kind of working against the rest of sort of the manufacturing sector, which is actually having a bit of a renaissance. On the other hand, Algoma, this is a company that's essentially in a commodity-esque type industry. So they're going through the same thing that oil and gas is right now out in Alberta and Saskatchewan and Newfoundland. So they're sort of more in tune with the Canadian economy, whereas Bombardier, again, it seems to be more managerial error.
Understood. I want to thank both of you for coming in tonight and helping us understand this story a lot better. Mike Moffat from the Ivey Business School at Western University, Christine Oram, transportation reporter, Financial Post. Thanks, you two.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.